It had been 30 years of my life poured into this company. The faded blue collar of my shirt felt like a second skin, a testament to the countless hours I'd spent on the factory floor. I'm Mark, 47 years old, and this factory is my legacy. Or so I thought. I started here as a young man, barely out of high school, a kid with dreams bigger than the dusty warehouse ceiling, the metallic tang of the air, the rhythmic clang of the machines. It all felt like home. I'd seen bosses come and go, technology change, and the faces of my colleagues turn from fresh-faced youths to weary veterans like me. My wife, Sarah, always said I was married to the job. She wasn't entirely wrong. It provided for us, for our son, Alex. It put a roof over our heads and food on our table. It paid for his college tuition, allowing him to get an engineering degree, something I never had the chance to do. I was proud of that. I'd sacrifice promotions, more money, and a less strenuous life so that my boy could have a better one. And I never regretted it. The last few weeks there had been a buzz in the air, a low hum of anticipation that wasn't from the machinery. The plant manager, Mr. Henderson, was retiring. The position was up for grabs, and everyone on the floor knew who the obvious choice was. It was me. For 3 decades, I'd been the go-to guy, the one who fixed the machines when they broke down, the one who trained the new hires, the one who stayed late without asking for overtime. I knew every nut and bolt, every crevice and quirk of this place. I was the heart of this operation. I saw the looks from my co-workers, the quiet nods of respect. They knew it too. "It's your time, Mark," old Frank had said, slapping me on the back. "You've earned it." I allowed myself a small glimmer of hope, a rare feeling these days. I envisioned sitting in Henderson's office, the large window overlooking the floor where I'd spent my life. I pictured a better life for Sarah and me, maybe a small cabin by the lake for our retirement. Just a few more years, a last push, and we'd be set. The day of the announcement, the factory floor felt strangely quiet. The machines were still running, but the usual chatter was absent. Everyone was gathered around the main office, waiting. Mr. Henderson stood beside Mr. Davis, the company's regional director. Davis, a man in his 50s with a perfectly tailored suit and a condescending smile, cleared his throat. "As you all know, Mr. Henderson is stepping down. We're grateful for his decades of service," he began, his voice echoing over the quiet hum of the plant. He rattled off some corporate jargon about growth and innovation. My heart was pounding, a drumbeat in my chest. I felt a nervous bead of sweat roll down my temple. I was ready. "And so," Davis continued, his eyes scanning the crowd before landing on a figure standing a little to the side, "we've decided to promote someone who we believe embodies the future of this company, someone with a fresh perspective and the educational background to lead us into a new era of efficiency and productivity." He gestured to a young man, barely out of college, who had been an intern here for a few months. His name was Daniel. I remembered him. He was a good kid, eager to learn, but he still had a lot to figure out. He was just a kid, really, my boy's age. My blood ran cold. The air thickened, becoming heavy and hard to breathe. I must have misheard. This wasn't happening. I looked around, searching for a sign that this was a mistake, a cruel joke. But the faces of my co-workers were a mix of confusion and pity. A few of them looked directly at me, their expressions a quiet apology. "Mr." Davis then said the words that shattered my world. "Please join me in congratulating your new plant manager, Daniel." A smattering of applause broke out. Not a roar of approval, but a polite, almost reluctant clapping. Then, a few of the younger guys, the ones who had worked with Daniel more closely, started clapping louder, cheering. "Way to go, Dan!" someone yelled. Daniel looked embarrassed but proud. He shook Mr. Davis's hand with a firm grip, and then Henderson's, his eyes gleaming with ambition. The applause grew, and soon almost everyone was clapping, even Frank. I watched, a silent observer in my own life's tragedy. It was a bizarre, surreal scene. My colleagues, the men I had worked beside for years, the men who had seen my dedication, my sweat, and my loyalty, were now applauding the promotion of a rookie. They were cheering for the very thing that made me invisible. It felt like a betrayal, a punch to the gut. The world around me started to spin, and the familiar smells and sounds of the factory became alien and oppressive. I needed air. I walked away from the crowd, a ghost in my own home. I went to the washroom and splashed cold water on my face. The man in the mirror was a stranger. His eyes were hollow, his face etched with a lifetime of hard work, and now a deep, bitter disappointment. I couldn't recognize the person staring back at me. 30 years. It all meant nothing. My life's work, my sacrifices, my loyalty, all swept aside for a kid with a diploma and a suit. My phone vibrated in my pocket. It was Alex. "Hey, Dad. I heard they're announcing the new manager today. Good luck." I stared at the screen, the words a fresh wound. He didn't know. He thought I was getting the job. How could I tell him? How could I explain that his father, the man he looked up to, had been deemed irrelevant? The thought of his disappointment, the look on his face, was more painful than my own humiliation. I couldn't do it. Not yet. I had to figure this out first. When I returned to the floor, the ceremony was over. Daniel was talking to some of the guys, a clipboard in his hand. He looked up and saw me. "Hey, Mark," he said, walking over. "I know this must be a shock. I just wanted to say that I really respect you and all you've done for this place. I hope I can count on your support." I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him that his respect meant nothing. I wanted to tell him that he had no idea what this place truly was, what it meant to people like me. But the words were stuck in my throat, a lump of bitter ash. I just nodded. "Sure, kid," I managed to say. "Anything you need." He smiled, a genuinely friendly smile that only made it worse. He had no idea what he had taken from me. He was just a pawn in a game I didn't know I was playing. I walked away, feeling the weight of my 3 decades of service pulling me down, a lead anchor tied to my heart. The rest of the day was a blur of grinding gears and silent conversations. The men and women I had worked with for years avoided eye contact, their pity a constant, suffocating presence. I was the one who had been passed over, the one who had been publicly humiliated, and they were the ones who had to live with the aftermath. As I drove home, the setting sun cast long, lonely shadows on the highway. My mind replayed the scene at the factory, the sound of the applause, the sight of Daniel shaking hands, the silence from my old friends. It wasn't just about the job anymore. It was about my place in the world, my identity. This job wasn't just a means to an end, it was who I was. And now I was nothing. I was invisible. The worst part was knowing I had to go home and face Sarah. I had told her I felt good about my chances. I had let a tiny bit of hope grow, and now I had to extinguish it and tell her the truth. The car felt like a cage, and the drive home, which usually felt like a journey to comfort and peace, now felt like a long, arduous march toward another moment of crushing defeat. The weight of my son's college debt and the hope for a comfortable retirement hung over me, heavier than any machinery I had ever lifted. My dream, our dream, was gone, replaced by a deep, gnawing fear of the future. The emotional impact was a physical ache, a coldness in my bones that the late afternoon sun couldn't warm. The key scraped against the lock, a sound that usually meant the end of a long day and the beginning of a peaceful evening. Tonight it felt like the opening of a dreaded curtain. I pushed the door open to the comforting scent of Sarah's cooking. The warm glow from the kitchen was a stark contrast to the cold lump in my stomach. She was at the stove, humming a soft tune, her back to me. Her hair, now streaked with silver, was tied back in a neat bun. She had a peaceful, contented air about her that I couldn't bear to shatter. "Mark, honey, you're home," she said, turning with a smile that was all sunshine. "I made your favorite, pot roast. The house smells wonderful, doesn't it?" I forced a smile, a pathetic attempt to hide the storm brewing inside me. "Smells great, hun. I'm just going to wash up." I escaped to the bathroom, the porcelain sink a cold, hard reality against my fingertips. I stared at my reflection again, trying to find the man she saw, the man who was a provider, a protector, a pillar of strength. All I saw was a failure. The years of sacrifice, the pride I had carried, felt like a joke now. I washed my hands, scrubbed them as if I could wash away the stain of my humiliation. Dinner was a quiet affair. I picked at my food, the tender pot roast tasting like sawdust. Sarah, ever perceptive, noticed my silence. Is everything okay, Mark? You've been so quiet since you got home. I swallowed hard, the words catching in my throat. I looked at her, at the hope in her eyes, the trust she placed in me. I wanted to protect her from the disappointment, but the truth was a heavy, inescapable thing. I didn't get it, Sarah. Her fork clattered against her plate. Didn't get what, honey? She asked, her voice soft with confusion. The manager job, Henderson's position. I said it quickly, like ripping off a Band-Aid. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. They gave it to Daniel, that young kid, the intern. The light in her eyes flickered and died. A shadow of disbelief crossed her face, followed by a flicker of anger. Daniel, but why? You've been there for 30 years, Mark. You know that place better than anyone. I know, I said, the words a hollow echo. They said they wanted someone with a fresh perspective, a degree. My voice broke on the last word. It felt so pathetic, so small. A piece of paper was worth more than 3 decades of my life. She reached across the table and took my hand, her touch grounding me. Mark, that's not fair. That's just wrong. All those late nights, all the extra work you put in, and for nothing. Her voice was laced with indignation, and it was a small comfort, a fleeting warmth in the cold reality. I don't know, I whispered. The truth was I didn't. I felt lost. The path I had been on for so long had just disappeared, leaving me standing on the edge of a cliff. The retirement cabin, the dreams of a peaceful future, it all felt so far away now. The weight of Alex's student loans pressed down on me, a new suffocating burden. The phone rang and my heart leaped into my throat. It was Alex. Sarah looked at me, her eyes pleading. Don't tell him, Mark, not yet. Let's just get through tonight. I nodded, grateful for the reprieve. I let the call go to voicemail. The silence that followed was different now, no longer peaceful, but filled with a tense, unspoken anxiety. We finished dinner in a quiet, somber mood, the food now completely unappetizing. Later that night, as we lay in bed, the darkness seemed to magnify my fears. Sarah lay beside me, her breathing steady, but I knew she was awake. I could feel the tension in her body. What are we going to do, Mark? She finally whispered. I don't know, Sarah, I admitted, my voice hoarse. I'll figure it out. I'll talk to Daniel, see what his plans are. Maybe things won't change too much. I said it more to convince myself than her. Things are already changing, she replied, her voice filled with a quiet sadness. He's not your boss. You'll be working for a kid. This isn't what we worked for, Mark. Her words were a new stab of pain. She was right. The dynamic had shifted. My role as the respected veteran had been stripped from me, replaced by that of a subordinate to a man half my age. The very thought made my blood boil. The unfairness of it all was a constant burning sensation in my chest. The next morning I woke up with the same sense of dread. The air was crisp, a typical fall morning in the Midwest. The drive to the factory felt different. It was no longer a journey to a place of pride, but to a place of shame. As I walked onto the floor, I saw Daniel walking around, talking to the team leaders. He looked confident. He looked like he belonged. The pit in my stomach grew larger. I tried to focus on my work, but every glance from a co-worker felt like a judgment. I could hear whispers in the break room, muffled conversations that stopped as soon as I entered. It was like I had a giant neon sign on my back that said, "The Loser." Later, Daniel called a short meeting. He stood in front of us, a laptop open, a projector screen displaying a graph with an upward trend. "Good morning, everyone," he said, his voice a little too cheerful. "I just wanted to lay out some of my initial plans. We're going to focus on optimizing our production line. My projections show that by implementing new software and recalibrating our machinery, we can increase our output by at least 15%. My blood ran cold. He was talking about the very things I had been telling Henderson for years, but Henderson had always said the cost was too high. It was a slap in the face. My ideas, my decades of experience, were only valuable when they came from a young, college-educated kid. Daniel continued, his words a blur of technical jargon I had come to despise. He was laying out his entire plan. a plan that would change the very heart of this place, without a single consultation with the people who had built it. He was moving too fast, without a proper understanding of the subtleties, the small human elements that made the factory run. His plan was based on numbers and spreadsheets, not on the hands-on experience of the people who actually did the work. "We need to streamline," he said, his eyes scanning the room. "And that means some adjustments to the team. I'll be scheduling one-on-one meetings with each of you to discuss your roles and how we can best utilize your skills in this new, more efficient environment." The implication was clear. He was going to shake things up. He was going to change things, and I, the 30-year veteran, was just another cog in his machine. My stomach churned. The disrespect was a physical thing, a punch to the gut. The feeling of being erased, of having my life's work dismissed so casually, was a torment I couldn't escape. The applause from the day before, which had seemed so bizarre, now made perfect, terrible sense. They were applauding a new era, an era that had no room for me. The silence at home was a prelude to the storm. The silence at work was a sign of my new status. Invisible, irrelevant, and utterly disposable. I felt a knot of anger tighten in my chest, a burning coal of resentment that I knew would not be easy to extinguish. The fight, I realized, was far from over. It was only just beginning. The first few weeks under Daniel's management were a slow, agonizing descent into a new kind of hell. The factory, once a place of comfort and routine, now felt like a foreign land. Daniel was everywhere, a whirlwind of energy and youthful ambition. He moved with a sense of purpose that I once had, a quiet confidence that was now a constant, grating reminder of my own failure. He'd walk the floor, clipboard in hand, his eyes scanning the machinery, but he wasn't really seeing it. He was seeing numbers, potential for optimization, and data points, not the worn steel, the small fixes, or the decades of history I knew were etched into every surface. He started implementing his changes almost immediately. New software was installed, a complex system of digital tracking that was supposed to increase efficiency. To me, it was just a clunky, unnecessary complication. The old way, the way we had done it for 30 years, had worked just fine. We knew what we were doing, we knew the rhythm of the work, but Daniel's new system created a digital layer of surveillance, a constant reminder that we were being watched, judged, and measured against a new, impossible standard. The one-on-one meetings were the worst. I sat in his office, the same office I had envisioned as my own, and listened to him talk about synergy and recalibration. He asked me about my role, what I thought I could contribute to his new vision. I felt like a museum exhibit, a relic from a forgotten time. I tried to explain the nuances, the small tricks of the trade that you only learn from experience, the subtle art of keeping the old machines running. He just nodded, a polite, vacant look in his eyes. "That's valuable insight, Mark," he'd said, his voice full of the corporate sincerity that felt like a lie. "But we're looking to modernize. We need to focus on moving forward, not clinging to the past." His words hit me like a physical blow. Clinging to the past. That's what he saw. My 3 decades of dedication, my loyalty, my very identity, were just a crutch, an old habit he needed to break. I left his office feeling smaller, more insignificant than I had ever felt in my life. The unspoken betrayal wasn't just from the company. It was from my own colleagues. Frank, my old friend, started avoiding me. He'd make a beeline for the other side of the factory floor when he saw me coming. When we did talk, the conversations were stilted, awkward. He'd talk about Daniel's plans with a strange, hesitant enthusiasm. "The new software is pretty slick, isn't it?" he'd say, a look of guilt on his face. He was trying to fit in, to survive. He was doing what they all were doing, applauding the new king, while the old one was left to rot. The silence from Alex was just as painful. I still hadn't told him the truth. I couldn't bring myself to do it. Every time he called, I'd lie, telling him things were fine, that I was still settling in. The weight of that lie was a heavy, constant pressure on my chest. He was busy with his studies, and I was grateful for the distance. It gave me a chance to pretend, if only for a few minutes, that everything was normal. But the truth was a ticking time bomb, and I knew it was only a matter of time before it exploded. The tension at home was palpable. Sarah was trying to be supportive, but I could see the worry in her eyes. The retirement talk had stopped. Now our conversations revolved around bills, the rising cost of groceries, and the looming student loan payments. Every time she mentioned money, I felt a fresh wave of shame wash over me. I was failing. I wasn't just a father and a husband. I was a provider, and I was failing at the one thing that mattered most. The resentment toward Daniel grew every day. It wasn't just about the job anymore. It was about everything. He represented everything I wasn't. Young, educated, and valued. I started to see him not just as my boss, but as the reason for all my troubles. The reason for the silence from my son, the worry in my wife's eyes, the shame I felt every morning as I put on my work clothes. One afternoon, a conveyor belt jammed. It was a common problem, an old machine with a stubborn temper. I'd fixed it 100 times. I grabbed my toolbox and headed over. Daniel was already there, staring at a tablet, trying to decipher a diagnostic report. He looked flustered, his youthful confidence replaced by a look of panic. "The system says it's a sensor malfunction," he said, running a hand through his perfectly combed hair. "But I can't seem to find the issue." I looked at the machine, at the twisted metal and the misplaced gears. I didn't need a tablet or a diagnostic report. I knew what was wrong. The old bearing was shot, a classic problem. It was a simple fix, one that required experience, not a computer. "It's not the sensor," I said, my voice flat. "It's the bearing. It's been rattling for weeks. You need to replace it." He looked at me, a flicker of doubt in his eyes. "The system says—" "The system is wrong," I snapped, the bitterness finally bubbling over. "This machine has been here for 30 years. I know what it's doing. Trust me." He hesitated for a moment. Then, to my surprise, he stepped back. "Okay, Mark, go ahead." I went to work, my hands moving with a practiced ease. I replaced the bearing, cleaned the gears, and in 15 minutes the conveyor belt was humming along smoothly. When I finished, Daniel looked at the tablet, which was now showing a green light. "Well, I'll be," he said, a look of genuine surprise on his face. "You were right, thank you." For a moment, just a fleeting moment, I felt a spark of the old pride. I had proven my worth. I had shown him that a degree and a tablet were no match for experience. But the moment passed quickly. It was a one-time thing, a small victory in a losing war. He would go back to his spreadsheets and his modernization, and I would go back to being invisible. As I walked away, I saw Daniel looking at the machine, a thoughtful expression on his face. I didn't know what he was thinking, but it didn't matter. My resentment was too deep, my humiliation too complete. I was no longer interested in proving myself. I was only interested in surviving. And as the days turned into weeks, my anger started to morph into something else, something far more dangerous. It was a quiet, cold fury. A seed of a plan, a desperate, dangerous idea, was beginning to take root in the back of my mind. I was no longer just the victim of a corporate betrayal. I was a man on the edge, and I was starting to see a new way forward, a path that was not about reconciliation, but about retribution. The lie to Alex had become a heavy cloak I wore every day. Each time he called, I had to carefully navigate the conversation, making sure not to slip up. He'd ask about work, and I'd give vague, non-committal answers. "Yeah, it's a little different with Daniel in charge, but we're getting by." The truth was, I wasn't getting by. I was barely holding on. The unspoken tension at home was a constant weight. Sarah was doing her best, but the joy had gone out of her. The late-night conversations had become a minefield of financial worries. We were so close to paying off Alex's student loan, but with the rising cost of living and the prospect of my own wages stagnating, it felt like we were running on a treadmill that was moving faster than we were. My resentment for Daniel deepened with every passing day. He was a constant presence, a living symbol of my failure. He'd walk the floor with his tablet, making notes, and the men would defer to him, nodding and agreeing with everything he said. I watched them, the same men who had clapped for him now hanging on his every word. It was a bitter pill to swallow. One afternoon I was in the break room when I overheard two younger guys, Mike and Tony, talking. They didn't see me in the corner, and their voices were low, conspiratorial. "Did you hear Daniel's plan for the new robotic system?" Mike said, his voice filled with awe. "He showed me the blueprints. It's going to automate the entire assembly line. We'll be able to triple our output." Tony whistled. "Man, that's crazy. That'll mean big bonuses for us, right?" "Yeah, that's what he said. He's a genius, man. You can see why they hired him. Old-timers like Mark just don't get it. They're stuck in the past." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. Old-timers like Mark. I felt a flush of heat rise up my neck. They were talking about me as if I wasn't even there, as if I were a ghost. They were celebrating a plan that would likely make my job, and the jobs of many others, obsolete. They saw me as a relic, an obstacle to progress. I stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. Their conversation stopped abruptly. They saw me and their faces drained of color. Mike fumbled with his soda can, and Tony looked at the floor, a picture of guilt and discomfort. I didn't say a word. I just walked out, my heart a leaden weight in my chest. That night, the lie to Alex finally crumbled. He called, his voice bright and excited. "Dad, I got some good news," he said. "The student loan company called. They said someone made a big payment on my account. A huge one. They said the balance is almost gone." "Who was it?" My blood ran cold. My heart pounded against my ribs. Sarah and I hadn't made a large payment. We couldn't afford to. I stood there, phone pressed to my ear, a sudden, horrifying realization dawning on me. I knew exactly who had done it. "Alex," I said, my voice shaky, I'm not sure. Maybe it was a mistake." He laughed, a genuine, happy laugh. "No way, Dad. They said it was a payment from a third party. Someone must have, I don't know, maybe a new employee benefit. Did something change at work?" I had to tell him. I couldn't lie anymore. The weight of it was suffocating. I took a deep breath. "Alex, listen, I need to tell you something. I didn't get the promotion." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "What?" "But you told me everything was going well. You were the only one who could get that job. Why?" I explained the situation, the promotion of Daniel, the fresh perspective, the lack of respect. I told him everything, the shame and humiliation pouring out of me in a torrent of words. When I finished, I waited for his reaction. I braced myself for his disappointment, his pity. "So," he said, his voice flat, "you're telling me you didn't get the job and then someone paid off my loan? Who would do that, Dad? That doesn't make any sense." My hands were shaking as I held the phone. I think it was my boss, Alex, Daniel." "What? Why would he do that?" he said, his voice rising in disbelief. "I don't know, son," I said, the words tasting like ash. Maybe he felt sorry for me. Maybe it was some kind of pity gift, a consolation prize for being passed over. The thought filled me with a deep, burning shame. I had been deemed so pathetic that my new boss, a kid half my age, felt the need to pay off my son's debt. It was a crushing blow, an ultimate humiliation. The silence returned, but this time it was different. It wasn't the silence of confusion, it was the silence of a profound, agonizing betrayal. The man who had taken my job was now paying my bills. He had bought my silence, my dignity. He had purchased my son's freedom from debt, and in doing so had robbed me of my own pride. Alex's voice, when he finally spoke, was cold and distant. "Dad, I don't know what to say. I'm sorry." He said it with a finality that felt like a goodbye. "I have to go, I have class." He hung up, and the dial tone was the most painful sound I had ever heard. It wasn't just my dream that was gone. It was the respect of my son. The very thing I had worked for, the pride of my son, was now tainted by a debt I couldn't pay. A kindness that felt like the cruelest act of all. The shame was a physical ache, a constant low thrum of agony in my chest. The plan that had been forming in my mind, a quiet rebellion, now felt more necessary than ever. It was no longer about retribution, it was about reclaiming my dignity, and I would do whatever it took to get it back. The morning after the call with Alex, I woke up with a new cold resolve. The shame had solidified into something hard and unyielding. The phone call had been a wake-up call, a slap in the face. My pride was gone, and I had to get it back. Daniel's act of kindness was a form of control, a way to make me feel small and indebted, and I wouldn't stand for it. The plan was simple and dangerous. I would use my decades of experience, not to help, but to hinder. I would become the ghost in the machine, the silent saboteur. I wouldn't do anything that could be traced back to me, but I would make sure Daniel's new systems failed. I would use my knowledge of the old machinery, the small quirks and temperaments I had learned over 30 years, to cause minor, untraceable problems. The first step was to identify the weakest links in his new plan. I watched him closely, a predator stalking its prey. He was so confident in his digital systems, so focused on the numbers on his tablet. He had no idea that the real factory was a living, breathing thing, one with a rhythm that couldn't be quantified by a computer. I started small. A small, almost imperceptible adjustment to a hydraulic pressure gauge on the old stamping machine. The machine still worked, but the pressure was just slightly off, causing the stamping to be a hair's breadth out of alignment. The product still passed inspection, but the flaw was there, a ticking time bomb of imperfection that would surely lead to a larger, more costly problem down the line. I did it during my lunch break, when the floor was mostly empty. No one saw me. I wiped the gauge clean, leaving no trace. The next day, Daniel was flustered. He was staring at the machine, his face a mask of confusion. The digital diagnostic was showing a green light, but he could tell something was wrong. "The numbers are fine," he said, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "But the output is come off, just a little. It's not right." I walked by, my face a picture of innocent concern. "You know, those old gauges can be a little finicky, kid. Maybe it needs a little recalibration." He looked at me, a flicker of suspicion in his eyes. "You think so?" "Could be," I said with a shrug, and walked away. The small victory was a rush, a jolt of power I hadn't felt in a long time. I was no longer the victim. I was the one in control. I continued my silent campaign. I'd loosen a specific bolt just enough so that it would rattle, causing a minor disruption to the conveyor belt. I'd tweak a power supply, causing a machine to lose power for a few seconds, long enough to mess up a production run, but not long enough to trigger an alarm. My work was subtle, precise, and untraceable. I was a ghost, a phantom of the past, haunting Daniel's future. The atmosphere on the factory floor grew tense. The initial cheerfulness of the new management had vanished, replaced by a low-level anxiety. The production numbers, which Daniel had promised would soar, were erratic. Sometimes they'd be up, sometimes they'd be down for no apparent reason. Daniel was a ball of stress, constantly checking his tablet, recalibrating the systems, and questioning the team leaders. His youthful confidence was slowly, but surely, beginning to crack. My colleagues, the same ones who had applauded him, now looked at him with a growing sense of doubt. They'd talk in whispers, not about Daniel's genius, but about his inexperience. "He doesn't get it," Frank had said to me in a rare moment of honesty. "He thinks everything is a computer problem. He doesn't listen to us, to the guys who have been here forever." I nodded, a small, knowing smile playing on my lips. It was working. The factory, which was once a place of unity, was now a place of division. The men were on one side, and Daniel and his spreadsheets were on the other, and I was the one pulling the strings. The calls from Alex were fewer and farther between now. He hadn't brought up the student loan payment again, but the silence between us spoke volumes. The shame was still there, but it was overshadowed by a new, more powerful feeling, a sense of righteous anger. I was doing this for me, but I was also doing it for him. To show him that I wasn't a charity case, that my dignity was not for sale, I had to prove that his father was not a failure. One day, Daniel called me into his office. He looked tired, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. "Mark," he said, his voice hesitant, "I need your help. Something is wrong with the new system. The diagnostics are all over the place, and our numbers are all over the map. I can't figure it out." I sat across from him, a ghost of a smile on my face. "I told you, kid, this place isn't about numbers, it's about feel. You can't just plug in a new system and expect it to work. You need to know the machines. You need to know the people." He stared at me, his face a mix of frustration and desperation. I know, but what do I do? I've tried everything." I paused for a long moment, a cruel, cold satisfaction spreading through me. "I don't know, Daniel. Maybe you should talk to someone with a little more experience." He looked at me, his eyes wide. "Are you saying you can help me?" "I'm saying," I said, leaning forward, my voice low and dangerous, "that you need to start listening to the people who were here before you, the people who built this place. You need to earn their respect. You can't just buy it with a degree or a check." He looked at me, a flicker of understanding dawning in his eyes. He knew. He had a glimmer of understanding of the deep-seated anger and humiliation he had caused. He saw the fire in my eyes, the cold, hard resolve. I had him. I had him right where I wanted him. The quiet sabotage had worked, but this was only the beginning. My revenge, I realized, was not just about making him fail. It was about making him see me. It was about making him acknowledge the man he had erased, and I would not stop until he did. The tension between Daniel and me had become a new, tangible presence on the factory floor. We were engaged in a silent war, a battle of wills. He knew something was wrong, and I knew he was looking at me, trying to figure out if I was the one responsible. The men on the floor could feel it too. They watched us, their faces a mix of morbid curiosity and quiet concern. I was a man with a secret, and he was a man with a mystery he couldn't solve. One afternoon, Daniel stopped me as I was heading to my locker. He looked more exhausted than usual, his face pale and his eyes shadowed. "Mark," he said, his voice a low, tired whisper, "I need to talk to you. Alone." He led me to a small, unused office on the far end of the plant. The room was dusty, filled with old paperwork and discarded machinery parts. He shut the door behind us, the click of the lock a final, decisive sound. He leaned against the wall, running a hand through his hair. "I know it's you," he said, his voice flat. "I've been going over the diagnostics and there are anomalies, small, almost imperceptible changes that don't make sense, and they only happen when you're around." My heart pounded, a drumbeat of panic and triumph. He knew. My plan had worked. I stood there, a challenge in my stance, ready to deny everything. But he cut me off before I could speak. "Don't deny it, Mark. It's pointless. I know. What I don't understand is why. I know you're upset about the promotion. I would be too, but why? Why would you sabotage the place you've given your life to?" The question hung in the air, a heavy, suffocating weight. The anger I had been holding on to for weeks, the humiliation, the pain, it all came bubbling to the surface. "Why?" I said, my voice rising with every word. "You really have to ask me that, kid. You come in here with your fancy degree and your big ideas, and you tell me that my 30 years of work, my life is worthless? You think you can just waltz in here and take over without earning a single ounce of respect?" He looked at me, his eyes wide. "I never said your work was worthless, Mark. I said we needed to modernize. I respect you. I told you that on my first day." "Respect?" I scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "You call it respect when you take my job and then pay off my son's student loans? What kind of charity case do you think I am? That was the most humiliating thing you could have done. You didn't just take my job, Daniel. You stole my dignity. You bought my silence, and you did it without a single word to me. You made me feel like a charity case, a pathetic old man who needed a handout." The words poured out of me, a torrent of all the resentment and hurt I had been carrying. I told him about the phone call with Alex, about the shame I felt, about the silent betrayal of my colleagues. I told him everything. When I finished, the room was silent, except for my heavy breathing. Daniel didn't say anything for a long time. He just stared at me, his face a mask of shock and, was it guilt? "Mark," he said, his voice barely a whisper, I had no idea." "Of course you didn't," I spat. "You're too busy looking at your spreadsheets to see the people around you." He shook his head slowly. "The student loan payment. That wasn't from me, Mark. I didn't do that." I stared at him, my mind reeling. "What? Don't lie to me, kid. The company, they said it was a third party. Who else would have paid it?" He walked over to a stack of old files, rummaged through them for a moment and pulled out a worn manila envelope. I knew about the loans. Henderson mentioned them in my briefing. He said you were a loyal employee and that he had been trying to find a way to help you with the debt. He said he had a surprise for you, something he was working on with corporate. He told me he was going to take care of you, Mark. He said you were the one who deserved it, and that this was his way of making sure you were taken care of in retirement, no matter what happened with the promotion. I stared at the envelope in his hand, a cold dread creeping up my spine. My mind went back to the day of the announcement, to Henderson standing beside Davis, his face a picture of grim sadness. He hadn't looked sad because he was leaving. He had looked sad because he was leaving me behind. I don't understand, I stammered, my carefully constructed world beginning to crumble. He retired early, Mark, Daniel said, his voice low. He was sick. He had a rare form of cancer. He had to stop working, but he wanted to make sure you were okay. He worked with corporate to set up a private, anonymous fund to pay off Alex's loans. He knew you'd be too proud to accept it from him directly. He was hoping to announce it to you personally after the promotion. But Davis decided to go a different route. I stood there, my knees feeling weak. My entire world, my anger, my resentment, my carefully planned sabotage, it was all based on a lie. A terrible, bitter lie. The pity gift from Daniel was a lie. The betrayal from Henderson was a lie. It was an act of quiet, immense kindness, and I had misinterpreted it as a crushing humiliation. The shame that I had felt for weeks was nothing compared to the self-loathing that now washed over me. I had accused Daniel, a good kid, of a terrible thing. I had sabotaged a factory I loved. I had driven a wedge between myself and my colleagues. I had convinced my son that his own father was a failure, all because of a terrible, terrible misunderstanding. I looked at Daniel, the young man I had hated, and I saw a good person, a person who had tried to show me respect, a person who had inherited a complicated situation he couldn't have possibly understood, and I had tried to ruin him. I'm so sorry, Daniel, I said, the words a raw, painful confession. I had no idea. I thought... He put a hand on my shoulder. I know, Mark. I get it. It was a tough situation. But we can fix this. We can fix everything. You just have to trust me. I looked at him, at his tired, earnest face, and for the first time I saw not a rival but a human being. The quiet sabotage was over. The game was up. But the real game, I realized, was just beginning. It was not about winning a job. It was about winning back my pride, my dignity, and the trust of my son. And the first step was to confess. The second, I knew, was to rebuild. The confession hung between us, a raw and fragile thing. The small, dusty office felt like a confessional booth, a place where a heavy truth had been revealed. Daniel didn't gloat, he didn't lecture me, and he didn't fire me. He just listened, his expression softening as the full weight of my misunderstanding settled on him. I'm not mad, Mark, he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. I understand, I wish you had talked to me sooner. I felt a fresh wave of shame. All the weeks of quiet sabotage, the resentment, the anger, it had all been for nothing. I had been so consumed by my own pride and hurt that I had blinded myself to the truth. I was too proud, I admitted, the words a bitter confession. I thought you were trying to humiliate me. I couldn't see past my own anger. He nodded slowly. I get it. But we can't go on like this. The factory is a mess. The numbers are a wreck. My boss, Mr. Davis, is going to be here next week to do a review, and if we don't fix this, a lot of people are going to lose their jobs. The fear in his voice was genuine. I looked at him, at the young man who had been a symbol of my failure, and I saw a human being with a heavy burden on his shoulders. He was in over his head, and I, in my blind rage, had made it worse. What do you want me to do? I asked, my voice subdued. I need your help, Mark, he said, his eyes pleading. I need your knowledge, your experience. I need you to show me how this place really works. I need you to help me fix this. The request was a new form of humiliation, but a necessary one. I had to earn my way back, not just into his good graces, but into my own. I had to make up for the damage I had caused. "Okay," I said, my voice firm. "I'll help you, but you have to listen to me, and you have to tell the guys the truth about Henderson." Daniel hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Okay. I'll call a meeting tomorrow morning. I'll tell them everything, but you have to be there with me." The next morning, the factory floor was buzzing with a new, anxious energy. Everyone knew a meeting was coming. Daniel and I stood together in front of the assembled workers. I felt a nervous sweat on my brow. My knees were shaking. This was it, the public confession, the ultimate act of humility. Daniel began, his voice surprisingly steady. He started by apologizing for the tension and the recent problems. Then he got to the point. He told them the truth about Henderson, about his illness, and about his quiet final act of kindness. He explained that the student loan payment was not a corporate decision, but a personal one from a man who cared deeply about his employees. The murmuring started slowly, a low hum of disbelief. Then it grew louder. I saw Frank in the back, his mouth agape. His eyes met mine, a flicker of understanding and regret in their depths. The anger and resentment that had been festering for weeks began to dissipate, replaced by a quiet, somber respect for a man they had all admired. Then Daniel turned to me. "And as for me, I owe Mark an apology. When I first got here, I was so focused on my numbers and my plan that I didn't see the people. I made a lot of mistakes, and I took your experience for granted." Mark was right. Her degree and a tablet can't replace the wisdom of a man who has given 30 years of his life to this place. He's been trying to tell me that for weeks, and I wouldn't listen. "I'm asking for your help, Mark, and I'm asking for all of your help. We have a lot of work to do." He stepped back, and the silence that followed was different from the one on the day of his promotion. It was a silence of respect, of understanding, and of forgiveness. I felt a wave of relief so powerful it almost brought me to my knees. The men looked at me not with pity, but with a new sense of camaraderie. The invisible man was visible again. Over the next few weeks, the atmosphere in the factory changed completely. Daniel started working with me, not just as my boss, but as my student. I showed him the small, hidden tricks of the trade. I showed him how to listen to the machines, how to feel the rhythm of the production line. He started holding regular meetings with the team leaders, asking for their input, their ideas, and their insights. He listened, and they responded. The quiet sabotage was replaced by a quiet cooperation. I went around, fixing all the small problems I had created. Daniel, armed with his new knowledge, was able to recalibrate his systems, and the numbers began to climb. We were working together, a team of old-timers and a young, smart kid who was finally seeing the value of experience. The calls with Alex became easier. I told him the truth about Henderson's illness and his final act of kindness. I told him about the terrible mistake I had made. He listened, his voice subdued. "Dad," he said, after a long pause, "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have jumped to conclusions. I'm just glad you guys figured it out." The words were a balm to my soul. The shame wasn't completely gone, but it was being replaced by a sense of humility and a new kind of pride. I had made a terrible mistake, but I had faced it. I had confessed, and I was making things right. The factory was slowly healing, and so was I. The betrayal wasn't from a young, ambitious boss. It was from the one person I had to reconcile with, myself. The process of rebuilding trust was slow, like mending a broken bone. The initial shock and relief had given way to the hard work of making things right. I was no longer the silent saboteur, but the co-pilot. Daniel and I were an unlikely pair, a fusion of old-school wisdom and new-age innovation. He would come to me with a new idea, and I would offer my practical, hands-on advice. He'd talk about predictive analytics, and I'd remind him of the importance of listening for the telltale rattle of a failing gear. We were a team, and the factory was starting to hum with a new, more efficient rhythm. The guys on the floor started treating me differently. There was a newfound respect in their eyes. They would come to me with their problems, not just about the machines, but about their own lives. They saw me as someone who had made a mistake, owned up to it, and was now working to fix it. My relationship with Frank was slowly healing. We'd talk during our breaks, not about Daniel's plans, but about our families, our shared history. He never brought up the applause, and I never brought up his silence. The unspoken understanding was a sign of a friendship being restored. The biggest challenge was still at home. Sarah was relieved and happy that the truth was out, but the financial anxiety was still there. The student loan payment from Henderson had been a massive help, but it was only a partial payment. We still had a considerable amount to pay off, and the looming fear of my retirement, or lack thereof, was still a very real concern. One night, Sarah brought it up. "Mark," she said, her voice soft, "it's wonderful that things are better at work, but what about us? What about our retirement?" I had no easy answers. "I don't know, Sarah," I said, a weary sigh escaping my lips. "I'm doing my best. Maybe he can help me get a promotion." The words felt hollow as I said them. The last thing I wanted was another promotion. The last one had cost me everything. A few days later, Daniel called me into his office. He looked serious, his usual friendly demeanor replaced by a look of professional gravity. "Mark," he said, gesturing for me to sit down, "I have something to tell you. Mr. Davis, the regional director, is coming for a visit next week. He's heard about the turnaround in our numbers, and he's impressed. He wants to see for himself." I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. Davis was the one who had overlooked me, the one who had made the final decision. He was the one who had praised Daniel's fresh perspective and his degree. The thought of facing him, of being judged by him again, filled me with dread. "What does that have to do with me?" I asked, my voice cautious. "Everything," Daniel said, a small smile playing on his lips. "I want you to be the one to give him the tour. I've told him about the partnership we've developed. I've told him that the success of the last few weeks is a direct result of your wisdom and your guidance. I want him to see that firsthand." I stared at him, my mind reeling. He wasn't just asking for my help. He was giving me back my dignity. He was putting me in the spotlight in front of the very person who had made me invisible. "Are you sure?" I asked, a tremor in my voice. "He's not a fan of old-timers." "Then we'll show him what an old-timer can do," Daniel said, his eyes filled with a new kind of respect. "Mark, you're not just an employee. You're the heart of this factory. It's time someone recognized that." The praise felt strange and foreign. I hadn't been praised in years. I was used to being the man who just did his job, the man who was seen as a relic. But Daniel's words were a new kind of currency, one that was more valuable than a paycheck. The week leading up to Davis's visit was a blur of preparation. Daniel and I walked the floor, and I showed him all the small, subtle changes we had made. The machines were running smoothly, the numbers were consistent, and the morale on the floor was the highest it had been in years. The day of the visit, I put on a clean, pressed shirt. It felt different. It felt like I was putting on a uniform, a symbol of my rediscovered purpose. Davis arrived, a tall, imposing man in a pristine suit. He shook Daniel's hand, his smile a little too tight. He gave me a quick, dismissive nod and then turned to Daniel. "So, Daniel," he said, his voice crisp, "I've heard great things. You've had a remarkable turnaround. I'm impressed." "Thank you, sir," Daniel said, gesturing to me. "But I have to give the credit to Mark here. He's the one who made it all happen." Davis looked at me, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He clearly didn't remember me. I was just another face in the crowd. Daniel explained our partnership, the way my experience had complemented his education. He spoke with a genuine, heartfelt respect that made my heart swell with pride. I took Davis on a tour of the factory. I didn't just point out the machines. I told him their stories. I told him about the old stamping machine that was like a stubborn old mule. I told him about the conveyor belt that had a bad habit of getting a little off-center. I didn't use corporate jargon. I spoke the language of the factory, a language that only a man who had spent his life on the floor could speak. He listened, his cold, businesslike demeanor slowly thawing. He asked questions, and I answered them with a confidence I hadn't felt in a long, long time. I was no longer a victim. I was an expert. I was a man who knew his craft, and I was proud of it. At the end of the tour, he stood there, looking out at the humming factory floor. He looked at me, and his eyes held a new kind of respect. "Mark," he said, his voice softer than I had ever heard it, "you have a deep understanding of this place. I was wrong. I apologize." The words were a balm to my soul. It wasn't just Daniel's forgiveness that I had to earn. It was my own. And in that moment, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in weeks. The weight of shame and anger began to lift, replaced by a quiet, deep sense of purpose. The job wasn't about a title. It was about the work. And my work, I realized, was far from over. The apology from Mr. Davis felt like a turning point, a final act of vindication. The man who had dismissed me, who had seen me as a relic of the past, now saw me as a valuable asset. His words had been a public acknowledgement of my worth, and that was more valuable than any promotion or paycheck. The tension that had been a constant companion for weeks began to dissipate, replaced by a sense of calm and purpose. A few days after Davis's visit, Daniel called me into his office once more. He had a serious look on his face, but this time it was different. There was a sense of excitement in his eyes. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Mark, have a seat," he said. I sat down, my heart pounding with a nervous anticipation. He leaned forward, his hands clasped on the desk. "Mr. Davis was very impressed with you. He was impressed with the turnaround here, and he was impressed with our partnership. He saw what I've been telling him all along. He saw the value of your experience." I nodded, a small, grateful smile on my face. "I'm glad. I just did what I've always done." "Well, he wants to do something for you," Daniel said, leaning back in his chair. "He wants to make you the plant's chief operations officer. It's a new position. No one has ever held it. He wants you to oversee all of the plant's operations, training, and troubleshooting. You'd be my second in command, my right hand. You'd be in charge of all the on-floor operations, while I handle the logistics and corporate side of things. It would be a substantial pay raise, and it would come with a retirement plan, fully funded by the company, that would ensure you and Sarah are taken care of for the rest of your lives." I stared at him, my mind reeling. The words washed over me, a tidal wave of relief and disbelief. The retirement plan. A fully funded one. It was the one thing I had been dreaming of, the one thing I had worked for my entire life. It was more than I had ever hoped for. It was a chance for a new kind of life, a life of peace and security. I looked at him, at the young man who had once been my rival, and I saw a friend. He had not only given me back my dignity, he had given me back my future. "Daniel," I said, my voice thick with emotion, I don't know what to say." "Just say yes," he said with a grin. "We need you, Mark. This plant needs you. We can't do this without you." I felt a tear roll down my cheek. It wasn't just a job offer. It was a second chance. A chance to right all the wrongs I had done. A chance to start over. A chance to be the man I was meant to be. I thought of Sarah, of the worry in her eyes. I thought of Alex, of the shame I had felt. This was a way to make it all right. "Yes," I said, a deep sense of peace settling over me. "Yes, I accept." We shook hands, a firm, final gesture that sealed the deal. He was no longer just my boss. He was my partner. He was the one who had seen my worth when no one else had, including myself. He was the one who had given me a chance to redeem myself. That night when I got home, I found Sarah sitting at the kitchen table, a worried look on her face. "Mark," she said, her voice strained, "we need to talk. I just got a call from Alex. He said he saw a new financial report for the loans. The balance, it's gone." "Who did it, Mark? What's going on?" My heart soared. Henderson's final, quiet act of kindness had finally come to fruition. I sat down across from her and took her hands in mine. "It was Henderson, Sarah. It was a final gift. He did it because he cared about me. He did it because he wanted us to be taken care of." Her eyes filled with tears. "Oh, Mark," she said, her voice trembling. "I had no idea. All this time I thought—" "I know," I said, my voice gentle. "I thought so too. I made a terrible mistake. I let my pride blind me, but it's all over now. Henderson made sure we'd be okay. Then I told her about the chief operations officer position. I told her about the raise, about the retirement plan. I told her about Daniel's offer and his belief in me. She listened, her eyes wide with disbelief, and as I spoke, the worry in her eyes began to fade, replaced by a deep sense of relief and joy. "Oh, Mark," she said, her voice filled with a profound sense of gratitude. "I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud of us." We embraced, a long, heartfelt hug that felt like the beginning of a new life. The storm had passed. The factory was a place of opportunity again, not shame. And my family was whole again. The invisible man was no longer invisible. He was a man with a purpose, a man who had faced his demons and come out on the other side. The story was far from over, but the happy ending was finally in sight. Life at the factory settled into a new, comfortable rhythm. I was no longer just Mark the veteran. I was Mark the chief operations officer. My office wasn't the large glass-walled one Daniel occupied, but a smaller, more practical one on the floor itself, right in the heart of the action. It was a place where the men felt comfortable coming to me, a place where I could still be a part of the day-to-day work, a place where I truly belonged. Daniel and I were a well-oiled machine. He'd handle the corporate presentations, the budget meetings, and the long-term planning, and I'd handle the factory floor. We'd have lunch together almost every day, sitting at the small, dusty table in the break room, talking not just about work, but about our families, our lives, and our hopes for the future. He was a good kid, a good man, and I was proud to call him my partner. The men on the floor were happier, more productive, and more engaged. They saw me, the man they had once felt pity for, as the one who was now leading the charge. I trained the new hires, passing on not just the technical skills, but the philosophy of the place. I taught them that a machine wasn't just a piece of metal, but a tool that needed to be respected. I taught them that a job wasn't just a way to earn a paycheck, but a way to build a legacy. My relationship with Alex was finally on the road to recovery. He would call more often now, and the conversations were no longer stilted or awkward. He knew the truth about the student loan payment, and he knew I was doing well at work. He was proud of me, and that was the greatest gift of all. A few months after my promotion, Alex came home for a visit. He was different. He was no longer the boy who was consumed by the burden of debt. He was a young man with a bright future ahead of him. The weight had been lifted from his shoulders, and it was a joy to see. He came with me to the factory one afternoon. I gave him a tour, showing him the new systems, the old machines, and the men who had become my family. He listened intently, a newfound respect in his eyes. "This is amazing, Dad," he said, his voice filled with awe. "I never really understood what you did here. I just saw the paycheck. But this is a legacy. You built this place, Dad." The words hit me with the force of an epiphany. He was right. I had been so focused on the promotion, on the title, on the money, that I had forgotten the most important thing. I hadn't built a career. I had built a legacy. My 30 years of work weren't just a series of mundane tasks. They were the foundation of a place that was now thriving. My loyalty, my dedication, and my hard work had not been for nothing. They were the very things that had saved the plant. I looked at him, at my son, and I felt a sense of peace and pride I had never felt before. I had made mistakes, and I had faced them. I had lost my way, but I had found it again. And in the end, I had gained more than I could have ever imagined. The day came for my official retirement. I was standing on the factory floor, a sea of familiar faces in front of me. Daniel was standing next to me, and Mr. Davis was there, a rare smile on his face. Daniel gave a speech, and his words were a testament to our partnership, to the value of experience and to the power of a second chance. He talked about how I had taught him that a degree was just a tool, and that the real wisdom came from the people who did the work. When it was my turn to speak, I looked out at the faces of my friends, the men and women who had stood by me, and the young people who would carry the legacy forward. I spoke about the factory, not as a place of work, but as a place of life. I spoke about the lessons I had learned and the humility I had found. I thanked Daniel, not just for the job, but for seeing me when I had made myself invisible. I didn't talk about the money, the title, or the promotion. I talked about the feeling of a job well done. I talked about the pride of knowing that the work I had done was a part of something bigger. I talked about the legacy I was leaving behind. I shook hands with everyone, hugging the men who had become my brothers, and I walked out of the factory doors for the very last time. The sun was setting, a warm orange glow on the horizon, and Sarah was waiting for me in the car. She reached out and took my hand, her touch as comforting and familiar as the rhythmic clang of the machines I was leaving behind. "What now, Mark?" she asked, a gentle smile on her face. I looked at her, at the woman who had been my rock, and I smiled. "Now?" I said, a deep sense of peace in my heart. "Now we finally go home." The factory, my old life, was a part of me, a foundation of who I was, but my new life, my new legacy, was just beginning. It was a legacy of love, of family, and of a man who had finally found his place in the world. I drove away from the factory, leaving behind the noise and the clanging, and headed toward a quiet, peaceful future, a future I had finally earned.